Hello and welcome to the Snake River Alliance's second lecture in a series about the nuclear fuel chain. My name is Ava Traverso, Energy Program Manager of the Snake River Alliance, and I'll be your host tonight. Also with me tonight is Lee Ford, the Snake River Alliance's Executive Director, and Jeremy Cross, our Communications Manager. They will be helping me during question time and with any technical issues we might come across. First, I want to take care of a couple of housekeeping items for this evening. If you submitted a question via email, we will compile similar questions for the interest of time. If you would like to ask a question after the talk, you may use the raise hand function or write your question in the chat. If you would like to verbally ask your question, please keep your question to under a minute so everyone has a chance to go. And once everyone else has had a chance and there is time remaining, please feel free to ask another question. So I'll start with why we want to explore the entire nuclear fuel chain. There's been a lot of buzz around new nuclear being carbon-free, clean, and safe. While I agree that no carbon is produced at the moment the atom splits, it doesn't really tell the full story. Without further ado, I'm excited to welcome two special guests, Pat Marida and Terry Lodge. Pat has been an anti-nuclear activist since the 1980s when she was a volunteer staff person and board member of the Ohio Nuclear Weapons Freeze campaign. For 25 years, she held various volunteer positions in the Sierra Club, including serving on the executive committee of the Ohio Sierra Club and chairing the Central Ohio Sierra Club for 9 years. She helped found the Ohio Sierra Club Nuclear Free Committee in 2010 and served as its chair through 2020. She's currently coordinator with Ohio Nuclear Free Network, having helped start that organization 2 years ago. She was a retired pharmacist living in Columbus, Ohio. Terry is a longtime environmental activist and environmental and civil rights lawyer in Toledo, Ohio, who in a career of 43 plus years has represented grassroots activists and protesters, opposing nuclear power and weapons, and mountaintop removal, fracking and its radioactive waste, war and discrimination in employment. Terry currently represents scores of activists formally opposing the construction of two interim irradiated nuclear fuel dumps, one in Texas and one in New Mexico, and is pressing a lawsuit over the nuclear weapons implications of manufacturing high-assay, low-enriched uranium, or HALEU, at the Department of Energy plant site in southeastern Ohio. He's also assisting a small but tough group of activists in Irwin, Tennessee, who are outing of local factories' public health-threatening radiation leaks and nuclear weapons connections in an NRC license amendment case. Pat and Terry, we're thrilled to have you with us this evening, and we are excited for your presentations. Thank you.
Right. So I'm one of the coordinators, as Terry is as well, with the Ohio Nuclear Free Network. And we have members in 6 states in Canada. So we welcome members from wherever you live. We've been around for about 2 years, although many of us have been working together for a lot of years on nuclear issues. Okay. I'll get used to changing slides. So we want to, of course, make the connection between nuclear power and weapons. It's really, really crucial. And even the leaders are talking unabashedly about it. French President Emmanuel Macron is speaking about the importance of it. U.S. military leaders are speaking about the importance of it, and the funding, the technology, and the education and the infrastructure, and they all overlap. And and the peaceful atom, it gives legitimacy to the nuclear industry, and also it has moved the infrastructure funding from the military to the civilian, and that's an important reason why they wanted to have nuclear power. And of course, safety is greatly compromised to make nuclear power affordable. They just don't do the redundancy that really ought to be done. And I know I'm talking to the many people that are well informed, but radioactivity is forever. There's no safe dose. And the second thing we want to remind people of is who pays. We, the taxpayers and the ratepayers, are paying for most all of nuclear these days. The military, $1.2 trillion to upgrade nuclear weapons over the next 30 years. Obama started it. and Trump and Biden enthusiastically continuing it. With civilian, back in 2011, the Union of Concerned Scientists had an excellent report about how nuclear was not viable without subsidies. And the subsidies go through all the aspects of the industry, to labor and land, from mining and milling, to, of course, enrichment and regulatory oversight. We pay for regulatory oversight and security, and of course we'll end up paying for decommissioning. The Price-Anderson Act was passed in order to limit liability of the companies, because with any liability, no one would have touched nuclear. And construction work in progress that forces ratepayers to pay before any electricity is received. And then, of course, there's market competition favoritism in when companies compete for providing electricity, and this can happen through FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So Lee's already addressed the big lie: nuclear power produces no carbon and zero emissions. And how do they get away with this? It's just amazing. So the front end, how a nuclear reactor gets its fuel. So we have on this slideshow, I have linked 2 fact sheets. One is mining and milling. It's about uranium. And I understand that Leona Morgan gave you a talk about this, about mining and milling before. And so I'm going to focus on enrichment in this slideshow, and Terry's going to add things about nuclear fuel fabrication and more. So reactor construction and operation is the middle part, and it's an immense undertaking. And it still takes energy to run a nuclear power plant, even though it's already been built. And it has a massive water use. And then about half of that water goes up in as water vapor. It's hot, and it contributes to global warming. And then very hot water is discharged, and it is incompatible with the ecosystems that are. It's very destructive, especially in places like Florida at Turkey Point. So I believe you're going to get a link to our slideshow, and the slideshow has the links. These that are in yellow are linked, and our fact sheets are 1 page, 2-sided, and easily printable. If anybody wants to make copies to use for whatever reason, or handout, they make good handouts for people that are talking about these issues. So then, of course, the back end of nuclear is forever deadly radioactive waste. And we don't even think about how much energy it's going to take to isolate this for millions or hundreds of thousands of years. So again, the link is to our fact sheet, uranium enrichment and fuel fabrication. And this busy slide is about the front end industries after mining and milling occur. So there's conversion. And during that process, fluorine is added to uranium. It makes uranium hexafluoride, and that can be heated to make a gas, and a gas is needed for enrichment. Enrichment itself is a physical process, and it's concentrating the smaller and lighter fissionable uranium-235 into a usable weapons grade. The first enrichment was gaseous diffusion, and that's what happened at the Portsmouth nuclear site. And it also happened at a sister facility in Paducah, Kentucky. And so that concentrates the fissionable 235 by size, because the molecules go through sort of a filter kind of thing, and the smaller ones go through faster. Currently, they're enriching using centrifuges. And this concentrates the 235 by weight, because the lower weight ones spin off faster. And what we really want to do is stop laser enrichment. GE Hitachi has created a demonstration plant in North Carolina And they want to build a full-size one at Paducah, Kentucky, but there's really not that much market for enrichment right now, so they haven't gone ahead with that. But they've been given a whole lot of greased skids by the state of Kentucky. And the reason it's such a proliferation risk is because laser enrichment can be done in a very small building and without a heat signature. So no one's going to know if there's laser enrichment. No one's going to know, and the world is going to know who has nuclear weapons and who's enriching uranium. So then there's deconversion after the depleted uranium, which is the waste from the enrichment, which is like over 99% of the uranium is waste. The fluorine is taken off because the uranium hexafluoride is highly reactive, not only very toxic, but highly chemically reactive. So it's a good thing that they take this off, but you'll see that there's a problem with that also when we get to some of the next slides. Down blending, that's getting fuel from dismantling weapons. Fuel fabrication, Terry's going to talk about that, making uranium pellets and putting the pellets into fuel rods and those into fuel assemblies. Then reprocessing and MOX fuel. So that's reprocessing is getting fuel supposedly from high level waste. And then they get uranium and plutonium from radioactive waste, and so they have mixed oxides of plutonium. That's what MOX fuel is. But that fuel itself is really not been successful, and the reprocessing has made a hideous mess wherever it's happened. And then, of course, all the way through all of this, accidents, spills, and so forth are borne by local people and local communities to clean up anything that's found out about. And last but not least, well, probably most important is how do you finally clean up these front end facilities? Well, maybe you do that by sweeping it all under the rug, and it certainly is very expensive. And the picture there is the Honeywell conversion in Metropolis, Illinois. And that place spewed out uranium hexafluoride for years, and now it's closed while they're doing a major remake of that. So in Ohio, we have the Portsmouth nuclear site, and it's in southern Ohio. They enriched uranium there for weapons, first of all. It was built for weapons from 1954 to 2001. It's almost 4,000 acres, and those buildings covered 100 acres under roof. Now that's, if you think about that, they're 85, 65, and 45 foot tall buildings. They are/were. Some of them, one of them is completely down. The facility, it uses as much electricity as New York City. They built 2 coal plants to supply the electricity. And the worst thing that they did there was bring in high-level nuclear waste because they thought they could get some uranium out of it, and they ran it through all the process buildings. So the whole place is contaminated with transuranics. And of course, the dismantling is going to cost a lot of money. And that's an aerial photo of the site. So this picture then shows where it is located in Ohio, not too far from the Ohio River. And military and civilian overlap is prominent at the Portsmouth site. New uranium enrichment is about to get started there. Back in 2019, the Department of Energy gave a $115 million no-bid contract to Centrus to enrich uranium there by centrifuges. That got a lot of flack. That got some flack from Congress. So they put out for bids the new contract. But the only problem with the new contract was that it required that anybody else to build it in Centrus buildings there on the Portsmouth site. So they had no competition, and they got $150 million more just recently at the end of last year. So what they're going to make is called HALEU, H-A-L-E-U, for high assay low enriched uranium. It's actually enriched to, well, almost 20, just under 20%. Now, low enriched, the definition is, high enriched definition is 20%. So they're getting away with murder calling this low enriched. Actually, it's kind of, it should be called high enriched. But anyway, why 19.75%? Why that precise amount? That's hard to even get anything that precise. Well, because at 20%, it can't be exported. And actually, Centrus has a license to enrich up to 25%. And that at that level could make a dirty bomb, just spread that stuff around. And it's very easily enriched to 90%. And they want to do that for weapons and submarines. So, and the US, as I said, wants to export the technology, which is a proliferation risk. And why do they want to export it? Well, developing countries will need, if they have a US nuclear, they will need nuclear they'll need parts, they'll need equipment, all coming from the US. The US will provide training, and this will go on for years. And it really makes, would make them politically dependent, not only nuclear dependent, but politically dependent on the United States. So we have a flyer about all the goings on with this new industry and Centrus. And Terry may talk about, I'm hoping, how he is helping us and working with Beyond Nuclear as our lawyer seeking review on the licensing of this thing, because they did not do the required environmental impact statement. And again, military and civilian overlap, depleted uranium process. Now, I said before that the fluorine needs to be taken off of the uranium to make it less chemically reactive and safer to move around as uranium oxide. Well, instead of doing that, they're going to take part of the fluorine off, because uranium tetrafluoride is going to be used elsewhere. And I don't understand this process, but when depleted uranium weapons are made, they mix this tetrafluoride with magnesium and make depleted uranium weapons. And depleted uranium is used in munitions and shells and tanks. And when a shell explodes or hits a tank, it vaporizes that material, and it's very dangerous to ingest or breathe. And again, they didn't do the required environmental impact statement. We have a flyer on it. And again, the worst thing about depleted uranium from Portsmouth is that it's dirty. It's contaminated with this plutonium. So it greatly worsens environmental and health impacts wherever it's used, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in the former Yugoslavia, and even in southern Indiana, where they tested it. So the link shows about how much birth defects in Iraq have increased. And the picture there shows the UN assessing depleted uranium, and they're using protective equipment. So cleanup, supposedly, of the gaseous diffusion process plant down there is going on now. As I said, the high-level waste was run through all the process buildings, so it's a mess to clean up. Problems are materials with transuranics are being buried on site. There's cracked and permeable rock underneath the facility. And the rubberized liner is guaranteed to last 100 years, except when critters chew holes through it. And this has happened in other places. They're doing open air demolition. Oh, if I can get this going. Oh, I can't get my, anyway, that photo shows the, someone sneakily took that photo, that tarp is flapping. So they were supposed to well, they didn't cover anything up, but they got a lot of flack, so they covered a few things up. But that tarp, they covered it up with this flapping, and that I can't make the video work. Okay, so anyway, the streams, the Little Beaver Creek is contaminated, the groundwater is contaminated, they're moving stuff off site, and landfills. This is a huge problem. Not all of the landfills are being remediated, and we really want to insist that they do that. That should definitely be done. Okay. So the offsite contamination was first found out about when a 2017 annual site environmental report was released by the DOE in 2019 and identified neptunium in an air monitor outside the Zons Corner Middle School, which is shown there in the picture. It's 4 miles from the site. The school board closed the school shortly thereafter. We are working with Dr. Michael Ketterer, who some of you may know. He's a professor, retired professor, expert in analyzing radioactive materials. He has access to wonderful spectrophotometers down at Northern Arizona University. And he identified offsite radioactive elements from Portsmouth. And so the Department of Energy, I don't know, secretly or somewhere, they talked about his fringe science. Then we're also working with Dwayne Pullman, who's a Cincinnati TV reporter, CBS affiliate, and he's covered these issues on the site for some time. And I have a link to 20 video clips. Anyone can access those there. They're interesting. He interviews people that have children in the area that went to that middle school that are sick and then have died. And then we hired Joe Mangano. He is the executive director of the Radiation and Public Health Project out in New Jersey. And he is an international expert. You may have heard of him. He's done the baby teeth stuff and studying radioactivity in baby teeth. Anyway, we hired him to do an analysis of CDC statistics of health in Pike County. And what he found was rather shocking. From 1950, when cancer mortality was 12% below the US, it's gone up to 2020 of almost 33% more than the national average. And the overall death rate from people up to age 74 in Pike County went from way below to 85%. It was nearly double now the national average. So Ohio is the heart. There was a slogan, Ohio's the heart of it all. But now we're saying Ohio is the nuclear weapons, the heart of the nuclear weapons industry's expansion. It's home to one of the nation's largest nuclear complexes. And you can contact me if you want more information. My email is my name, Pat Marida, M-A-R-I-D-A, @outlook.com. And if you would like to join our listserv, you can put your name you can put your email and name too, I guess, in the chat. And thank you. The end.
Thank you, Pat. That was great. And I don't know if we want to go right into Terry and then do questions at the end, or if you'd rather take a few questions now. I guess if anybody has a burning question, I don't know. But if not, we can jump right into Terry.
So which is it? All right.
I don't see any questions now, so we'll wait till the end. And Jeremy might have gotten some in the email. So thank you, Terry.
Certainly. My greetings to our friends and allies in the West. I recognize a lot of names because I've been involved, as was mentioned at the beginning, in the fight against 2 consolidated interim storage, radioactive waste dumps, one in Texas, one in New Mexico, that the Department of Energy and the NRC proposed to use as holding facilities for an indeterminate period, possibly up to several centuries of nuclear waste. They have no realistic plan, but there are some entrepreneurs that stand to make a great deal of money in trafficking it. This is part of the lack of American foresight that goes back 8 decades, beginning with the Manhattan Project. There's a lot of things I want to cover, and I am possibly going to ramble, but Pat mentioned a number of things. I have been actively anti-nuclear since the mid-1970s. I'm originally from a lovely town on the Ohio River, southwest of Cincinnati in Indiana. Madison is the name of the place, beautiful place, very hilly country and all that. When I was a kid in the 50s, I became asthmatic at about age 6, and it was a direct result of the construction of a massive 1,000 megawatt coal burning facility on the edge of town that burned approximately 80 tons of good West Virginia coal per minute. It was much to my dismay. I moved to Toledo after graduating college. Toledo is about 265 miles north of my hometown. It's extreme northern Ohio. And as I became an anti-nuclear power activist in the mid-70s, I was home visiting my mother one Thanksgiving and realized when we went for an afternoon drive that the coal burning plant that gave me a lot of asthma problems for a long time was one of the 2 power plants mentioned on one of Pat's slides that was providing all of its electricity for the enrichment of uranium. So we had this ridiculous specter of 2,000 megawatt plants generating from coal, dumping all of their electric power. My hometown's about 170 miles from Piketon. They were sending it to Piketon to enrich uranium. So you're actually using energy to create more energetic uranium fuel for commercial nuclear power plants. Nowadays, they've abandoned the gaseous diffusion method, which was a very, very, very ineffective and pardon me, inefficient from an electricity standpoint. But it infuriated me once I realized that my lovely bucolic rural southern Indiana home had the 3rd highest emphysema and lung cancer rate in the state of Indiana. And that the counties number 1 and 2 in the ranking were the counties where the steel mills 280 miles north of me near Chicago were located. So I have a little bit of fury. And then even worse, Pat mentioned depleted uranium is found at an ammunition testing facility in Indiana. That is the Jefferson Proving Ground, which is 5 miles north of my hometown. There is they fired over 1 million artillery shells and tank shells, which are artillery also, throughout the Cold War, actually beginning at the outset of World War II through the early 1990s, over 1 million artillery shells. And beginning in the, I think the 1970s, they began testing depleted uranium artillery shells, but they, I guess, allegedly, the Department of Defense targeted them at about a 200-acre patch of this ammunition testing ground. So there is an approximately $18 billion remediation bill if the military were ever to try to clean up this contaminated, lovely, rolling, rural Indiana countryside that was converted into an ammunition testing ground. But they have decided to leave things as they are, slowly leaking into the Ohio River Basin forever. So I want to talk a little bit about what Pat was addressing as to Piketon and depleted uranium and also HALEU. The depleted uranium facility at Piketon has recently, in the last year and a half, installed a new product line. What they have been doing is trying to stabilize depleted uranium so it can be disposed of in some sort of permanent way. I might add that depleted uranium, as I understand it, has about a 4.5 billion year half-life, which means that long after the Earth has begun to crash into the black hole that is the burned out sun, there will still be depleted uranium on Earth that is decaying. Or to put it another way, the Earth is believed to have existed for about 4 to 4.5 billion years. Anyway, depleted uranium at Piketon, a lot of it is, as I say, being stabilized to be disposed of as waste. However, the new product line is there to actually purify the DU. DU is an extremely heavy metal, and as Pat indicated, is pyrophoric. When machine gun bullets or artillery shells that have a depleted uranium nose penetrate metal, they explode in a sort of a fiery way. They're very dangerous in that respect, as well as, of course, the fact that they do produce radioactivity, which, when ingested, can cause havoc within the body, within the cellular structures. But an interesting factoid about the new product line at Piketon is that they are purifying DU not just for use in bullets and artillery shells, but in fact to be used as components in nuclear weapons. The idea of purifying it is to remove what Pat's calling transuranics. Whenever there's a fissioning, use of nuclear fuel in a reactor, it basically fragments uranium atoms into other isotopes, including plutonium, including cesium, including a number of things, different isotopes of uranium itself. And so what happens is you have to purify, you have to remove those transuranics through a complex and dirty and worker unfriendly process in order to have it in a pure form for use in nuclear weapons. And that brings me into the new golden age of nuclear weaponry. Historically, after World War II, the federal government, our federal government, had some difficulty in camouflaging the horror of our using the bomb on 2 Japanese cities. There was a lot of revulsion. Some of the scientists in the Manhattan Project, which had designed and built the weapons, were turning against it and calling for global peace and all kinds of horrible things like that. And in the process, the nuclear industry, the commercial nuclear power industry, grew up and was heavily subsidized in part to provide a friendly atom or peaceful atom type of cover story. And that actually was embodied in advertising programs and all that, because I remember, and some of us who are old will remember duck and cover exercises at grade schools and things like that, because there was genuine fear once Russia developed, the Soviet Union developed and tested a weapon, I think in about 1949. That's when the onset of the global Cold War really took a new tinge. So in any event, commercial nuclear power flourished in large part due to a lot of subsidies, but it was in part designed, as I say, to put a nice friendly smiley face on the peaceful atom. President Reagan made an erroneous statement of fact in one of his State of the Union addresses, I believe, where he actually admitted that there was a nuclear power and nuclear weapons connection, that that some of the material, the so-called radioactive waste from nuclear power, was being used, digested by the War Department to make nuclear weapons. And that was kind of an interesting breakthrough from a public relations standpoint in the early 1980s. I remember well that when we were trying to explain to people that the peaceful atom isn't really so terribly peaceful, they kept saying, well, you don't have any evidence. I mean, they're making electricity and it's cheap, it's whatever. We're opening more and more plants every year. So that particular barrier was broken 40 years ago, but has sort of fallen into disuse or been forgotten by people. But the next generation nuclear reactors are nuclear weapons spreading machines. They are proliferation devices. And that is a particularly troubling thing, which brings me to the high-assay low-enriched uranium fuel, HALEU, being manufactured via centrifuge at Piketon. The idea is that the next generation designs, and there are approximately 10 different nuclear reactor designs falling under the name of either advanced reactors or small modular reactors, SMRs, that many, if probably about 2/3 of those proposed designs will be fueled in some way, or the conjecture is that they will be fueled in some way by high assay low enriched uranium. This 20% uranium enriched product that we're talking about, by comparison, the current generation of nuclear power plants uses uranium that is enriched to about 2 to 3%. Many of the reactors are using what's called a high burnup fuel, which is enriched to, I believe, 6 and a fraction up to nearly 10%, depending on the reactor. So you can see that at a minimum, HALEU is at least twice, if not sometimes in many respects, 3 times as enriched and thus energetic from a fissioning standpoint. And let me also say that when Iran announces that they are, Iran before the Biden and Trump administrations broke the deal, Iran was limited to enriching to approximately 2.6 to I think about 3.4%, standard fuel enrichment for a nuclear power plant of the current generation. When they announced that they were going above that to horrors 6%, the world went crazy, or at least those parts of it that are trying to combat what they perceive as an incipient nuclear weapons program in Iran. But here we are talking about routinely and in fact subsidizing to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars over the next half decade, talking about subsidizing HALEU up to 20%. As Pat indicated, even at 20%, technically that is weapons usable material. You'd have to build a very large bomb, kind of on the scale of what were of the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II. The great advancement, if that is an appropriate term, in the interceding 75 years or so, is that it is now possible to make warheads in a much more compact fashion, such that, for instance, a typical American or Russian nuclear armed submarine would carry approximately 16 missiles with the capability of striking in the aggregate 4 to 8 population centers each. You could basically decimate a lot of North America or Russia and Eastern Europe with the firepower from one Ohio class submarine these days. All of that thanks to the technological power of reducing the size, but raising the effect of nuclear explosions. So the depleted uranium at Piketon goes in part for nose cones, heavy pointed nose cones for our gravity bomb arsenal. There are several dozen bombs that are about, I believe they're something in the range of about 250 pounds that can be dropped from an F-16. You keep hearing about F-16s and how Ukraine wants them. F-16s are probably the most agile and relatively inexpensive bomber on the planet. They're great fighting planes and all that. They are also rigged up so that they could drop an American gravity bomb, especially one with a depleted uranium nose and depleted uranium components that can control the size of the explosion. So Piketon is producing very much for the weapons program. HALEU, as I've indicated, is a product that will be used as the fuel in small modular reactors. Small modular reactors are supposed to be standardized in terms of manufacture. They're not so terribly small, really. They would have, some of the larger ones would have about 1/3 to 1/8 of the generating power of a current, more or less standard nuclear power reactor, in the 250 to 350 megawatt range. The problem with SMRs is that, as I say, they promote or encourage, or at least make it possible for a lot of tin pot dictators and authoritarians around the globe to be able to build their own nuclear weapons. Some of the designs, Canada for many years has had a standard reactor design, but it is being somewhat miniaturized. Some of the proposed small modular reactor designs can actually be refueled while continuing to operate. About 30 miles east of where I'm living, there's a Davis-Besse nuclear power plant. A standard current generation nuclear reactor has to be shut down, and refueling is a complicated and somewhat scary process. But you can't generate electricity and refuel it all at the same moment. You can't be operating it and re-racking fuel in it. The CANDU, the Canadian reactor design of the 1970s, was exported to India, and ultimately a similar design to Pakistan. And that is how in the 1970s, both of those countries acquired the means to have their own nuclear weapons, because they could conceal, with the operation of the reactors, they could conceal the fact that they were mining, they were harvesting from the fuel itself. And as I say, a couple of the small modular reactor designs are supposed to do that. Some of the other designs under consideration would actually take nuclear waste, such as from the Davis-Besse plant near me, and reprocess it. Pat mentioned reprocessing. That's where you glean, you basically separate out isotopes. And the idea would be that through a dirty and dangerous chemical process, you could isolate some components of the isotopes that could be recombined into nuclear fuel and used in small modular reactors. And in any event, the United States, since the Atomic Energy Act was passed in 1946 and amended several times since, but the United States has had a requirement that in order to export any nuclear technology or fuel, it required a special act of Congress. And right now, even as we speak, Joe Manchin he now has co-sponsors, but he is sponsoring legislation that would completely do away with that requirement and make the free export of nuclear technology, and in particular small modular reactors, a real free-form device, a free-form activity. When Michael Flynn was for 2.5 weeks the special advisor to President Trump, he was at the same time a paid lobbyist for a consortium of 7 American firms that are pooling their talent and design capabilities to make a go of globally marketing small modular reactors. And one of the things that a congressional subcommittee has discovered is that while he was with the Trump administration for 2.5 weeks, that Michael Flynn was eagerly imploring the president to sign a special executive order to make it possible, basically to bypass the congressional approval requirement, so that export of nuclear power technology, which, as I say, is also potentially nuclear weapons technology, could happen expeditiously. These kinds of things are very scary when you put it in the context of the fact that the United Arab Emirates is in the final stages of completing 2 small modular reactors. I think they are from the Netherlands, and so is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has completed and is, pardon the dog barking, is completing the, they haven't signed the International Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, but they are, the Fresh Prince of Saudi Arabia has made it clear that he believes that there should be an Arab bomb as a counterweight to what they perceive as being the Iranian weapon, which incidentally doesn't exist. So what we have are already 2 examples of where countries with very undemocratic and very non-transparent government and energy sector programs are already trying to develop their own means of having nuclear material of some sort available and potentially usable for to be harvested again to provide material for nuclear weapons. So we are in a very interesting and dangerous time. I kept listening a couple of weeks ago when the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist moved the atomic clock 10 seconds closer to midnight. They didn't really talk very much about the proliferation potential of small modular reactors, but the American economy is being restructured in the direction of doing that, even in the midst of the Russo-Ukraine war, which of course has seen a great deal of saber rattling, and I think in some respects, some very necessary realizations coming to people that we really do have an awful lot of money tied up in insanity and in the ability to destroy the world in an afternoon. So where we are at this point, as I say, is at a time when part of the Infrastructure Jobs Act and some of the other economic stimulus bills, pardon me, I'm going to shut the door and at least hope that my friend will be quiet.
While Terry's gone, I might mention he's talking about Piketon. That is the small village where the Portsmouth nuclear site is located. So they're one and the same. And the Department of Energy likes to use them interchangeably to keep people confused.
What's the term, Pat? What were you talking about?
Portsmouth and Piketon.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
It's the Portsmouth nuclear site at Piketon, Ohio.
Right. Very good. Yes. So where things are right now is that we are in the early stages as a nation of seeing very unprecedented subsidies being directed into recreation of an American uranium fuel chain, which the DOE has been pursuing, which will have very considerable effects in the West and on indigenous tribes and in places where there are already hundreds of played out uranium mines. So there is considerable money that is being talked about being directed to I guess, reinforcing or stabilizing the existence of the White Mesa Mill. Also other elements such as the Metropolis plant in Southern Illinois that develops and processes yellow cake, which is the feedstock basically for ultimately the creation of nuclear fuel. There also is considerable money going directly into better bombs. One of my other legal involvements, as indicated at the beginning, is to work with people in extreme eastern Tennessee in Irwin. It's a lovely little town of 5,000 in the Appalachian Mountains, where Nuclear Fuel Services for 65 years has been downblending bomb material to 20% use a 20% uranium content fuel to be, again, something akin to high assay, low enriched uranium to be used in the nuclear navy. They are taking on a new product line that will actually refine and enrich highly enriched uranium. So we'll have even better bombs, which is something that I suppose all of us should desire. And pardon my, yes, I am sarcastic and I apologize. But one thing that is very troublesome in the pattern of things that's going on is that we haven't even closed nor understood the previous chapters of the American nuclear saga. The Piketon story Pat alluded to, that enormous death and disease accompanies for miles around places like Rocky Flats near Denver, places like Piketon in southern Ohio. They have discovered plutonium from the plant in Irwin, Tennessee, 95 miles downstream in a lovely scenic river that runs through east central Tennessee. That means that the entire riverbed for that 95-mile range contains radioactive material. And it, as Pat indicated, there's a yeoman retired scientist who's, for the most part, donating a lot of his time and talent to simply documenting these contaminations. The fact that there are, of course, American victims, whether they are Navajo miners in the uranium mines in Arizona, New Mexico, and other states, to the residents near such mines, to people living near Hanford, Washington, people living in Southern California, people living in many, many places where various stages of nuclear fuel or nuclear weapons material mining and processing takes place. And as I say, there's not been an appropriate understanding of what it has really cost us, whether it be special workers, federal workers' compensation program for nuclear workers, whether it be the incredible additional costs of maintaining or restoring people's health, or the amazing costs of burying people who are in some way ultimately victims of exposure around Piketon, around many places. Anyway, that's my diatribe. I think I ran over and I apologize.
Well, that's great. Thank you, Terry. Yeah, that's, I don't even know where to start with the questions. I've such a huge subject, but I just want to thank you both, Terry and Pat, for all your time. And just before we start question time, I just wanted to remind you, in that slideshow, she has some links to some fact sheets, Pat does. And then also I'm going to put a link. This website isn't working yet, but Pat, in about a month, it should be working, so that you can go and support her work.
Oh, I forgot to say that.
Is it the onfn.org? Is that correct?
Yes, it's not up yet, but it will be hopefully very soon. And we have a lot of good information to put up there.
Okay, great. Well, I'll look forward to that for sure. And then is there anywhere else people can go to support your work and learn more?
Well, you can absolutely still contact me at Pat Marida, PATMARIDA at outlook.com.
All right, great. Thank you. All right. Well, if you have some questions, you can either use the raise hand function or just raise your hand, or you can type them in the chat and we will ask them for you. And we have about 14 minutes left, I think, if that's okay, Pat and Terry, if we can hang on to you for a little bit longer to see if anybody has any questions. And I know I have one, and I feel like I should know this, but you mentioned the cancer rates around Piketon, Ohio, well, everywhere there's a nuclear activity, but what agency is responsible? Isn't there an agency responsible for doing the testing? I mean, I know I heard in INL, some of the industry is going to be doing their own monitoring. So I mean, how do we get into that? I mean, who's responsible for the health after the contamination has been found?
Pat, you want to answer that? Or you
Well,
want
there's nobody responsible for the health, but the Ohio Department of Health is actually in charge of looking at radioactivity off-site. And they at one time had a person in charge of it that was actually doing some good work and had been there for years and knew the site. And but then she was asking questions and that would not do. So they got a new program where that every official, every Department of Health person who is looking at the site would be, oh, I'm getting mixed up here, but the EPA then said that every person who is looking at what's going on there at the Portsmouth nuclear site would have to be rotated. So just in case at any site in Ohio that any EPA observer would know anything about, which is would be rotated, so they would never get to know a whole lot of what's going on. But as I said before, and Terry can chime in on this, the Department of Health is actually in charge of looking at radioactivity that comes off site, and the Department of Energy is not responsible for that. So Terry, you want to chime in on that?
simply to echo what you were saying, there have been several attempts over the decades to try to appropriate money for the NRC, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, to actually monitor and perform public health studies in the vicinity of nuclear power plants. Somehow those bills never get passed into law, and thus there is very little science unless it is done independently and outside of the NRC, such as at Piketon. So the problem is that there's nobody really in charge. Public health agencies at the state and local level are rarely equipped nor staffed up. Nor do they generally have the resources to undertake long-term epidemiological studies to track people. The news of that Joe Mangano publicized around Piketon is a shocker to everybody. Although people know anecdotally, I mean, there are some just god-awful stories, of course, of young children dying, of a 21 or 20-year-old baseball star that went to, I think, OSU, Ohio State University, and develops a brain cancer and is dead in a matter of weeks. Just that there are terrible deaths that go on unnoticed, unconcealed, unnoticed and not well understood or publicized, because we do very few autopsies because people die of sometimes multiple causes, and cancers are very difficult to identify as being explicitly from a source. And I do see that my friend Alfred Meyer has pointed out that my reference to 20% enriched uranium is not quite accurate. As Pat indicated, HALEU is 19.75%, but the margin of error that was granted in the license for the Centrus Corporation at the Piketon facility allows them to enrich to as high as 25% and try to average it out to something below 20. The 19.75% figure is public relations. It's to be able to tell people that we're not mixing weapons grade material here. This is just nuclear fuel, folks.
Thank you, Terry. That's incredible. Charlotte Connolly has written a question in the chat. What is known about the Federal Office of Nuclear Energy?
Many of the DOE agencies actually work in some degree of harmony. A few people know that there's an assistant Secretary of Defense who is also holds a dual capacity of being an assistant Secretary of Energy, overseeing the National Nuclear Security Administration, NNSA. It's a branch of the DOE, and that's the War Department for nuclear weapons. The Office of Nuclear Energy, we think, and have some evidence showing that they tend to provide sort of a civilian face to startup projects that are actually ultimately to gather data or prove the viability of a process for the NNSA. But not a lot. I have to admit, I don't know a great deal about the Office of Nuclear Energy, but see their name mentioned sometimes when you would wonder, why isn't this just candidly admitted to be an NNSA project? And it's because people get squeamish about learning that in Irwin, Tennessee, that their family members are going to be manufacturing bomb material.
Absolutely. Does Jeremy, did we get any questions emailed in or otherwise sent to you?
There isn't any, but I do have a question. Pat, you mentioned about subsidies. Do you know what percent of the nuclear energy in total is subsidized?
Boy, that's a tough one to figure that out in percentage. The Union of Concerned Scientists, as I said, attempted that or get an idea of that back in 2011, and their report is still online. If you want to, so that is the closest report that I know. The nuclear industry does not want you to know. But what I can say is that now it's going to be almost 100% subsidized and incentivized, or with loan guarantees that if the company can't repay, if they don't make enough money to repay, the public will be stuck. So they might be able to go ahead with this. Yeah, it's really a pie in the sky. It's really, I don't know how it can keep going, but I did want to say something about jobs. You know, they advertise jobs, and people are all excited, but those jobs, we pay for those jobs. You know, it's not like another kind of a more honest type of job where people are making money, where we're not paying for all the accoutrements that go with this. So that, and also military spending is just hugely inflationary.
And subsidies can take many forms. One of the ancient types is the Price-Anderson Act, which was enacted in the 1950s to provide a system of insurance for damage that might be caused by nuclear power accidents. Your homeowners or your renters policy has everyone's has an exclusion in it that says that your private Allstate, State Farm, whoever, isn't going to pay for any damage caused by a nuclear accident. And that's because this federal insurance program, whose ultimate premium payer is you, will pay for the damage. There's also a lot of, in current, boy, I wish my pit bull would shut up. There's also subsidies in the form of federal loan guarantees for the Sumner plants, 2 plants under construction in, I think, South Carolina, that have been canceled. And before they were canceled, they got, I'm thinking, $17 billion in federal loan guarantees. And folks, they're canceled. Those plants will not be completed, and $17 billion goes up in a cloud of dust. Another form of subsidy in Ohio is the source of the largest bribery scandal in the history of the state, where the state, the Speaker of the State House of Representatives, basically created channeling to pass through $61 million worth of campaign donations, as well as money for dirty tricks and bribes for many significant political figures in Ohio in order to pass a new law that would provide over $1 billion a year in subsidies to Ohio's nuclear power plants to keep them operating because they're no longer competitive. So there are a lot of different subsidies. It's very difficult to quantify.
So with this trial, the man that Terry mentioned, Larry Householder, the former speaker, what's being brought out is that these people at First Energy, that's the company that was doing all this giving away all this money and bribes and so forth, they sent out a picture once this bill passed, giving them $1.2 billion over I don't know how many years, but anyway, they have a picture. They've sent out a picture with their logo over the State House.
Yes, Joan, do you have a question? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I was just reviewing the chat room. Oh, shoot, where is it? And Alfred Meyer had posted something that saying SMRs are to develop nuclear Navy propulsion units. The military, especially in Colorado, we have the Air Force, the Navy, the Army. So they are absolutely promoting the SMRs for Army, for actually even for weaponry on the ground. And yes, for the Navy, the Air Force as well. I mean, it is pretty shocking. And I hadn't followed the military side of it until Pat Marida began to talk about the defense situation. But the SMRs are being moved to replace coal plants. Colorado is being wined and dined and offered money to talk replacing coal plants. And they're even bypassing state legislatures and the Defense Department or the DOE, I mean, is out there wanting to hand out money to talk about lots of commercial use of the SMRs for hydroelectric power, for on and on and on. So the picture's big. And I just want to thank Terry and thank Pat so much. They're right on top of this and teaching so many of us. And I just wanted to thank you so much for allowing them to speak tonight. It's amazing. And we want to hear from Snake River Alliance as well. I know in Colorado, we are just waiting to see where INL goes with their move on SMRs.
Hopefully not far, right, Ava? Thank you, Joan. All right, if there aren't any more questions.
Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Terry and Pat, for your time and expertise. I know you both are busy and I know we're all busy these days, but I know you both are especially busy individuals. So I really appreciate you kind of scheduling this in. And again, yeah, I would like to thank all our attendees and participants for your interest and for joining us tonight. It's important that we learn more about the nuclear industry and we make responsible and moral energy choices. If you would like to support this lecture series and learn more about the Snake River Alliance, please visit snakeriveralliance.org. There you can join the mailing list to receive an invitation to our next lecture in the nuclear fuel chain series. And remember to save the chat if you'd like. We will post the video to our event calendar as soon as possible. And I hope you all have a wonderful night and a great weekend. Thank you.